59 of Coffee and Co-Read, your source for all things literary with Catherine
and Kristen, where we believe there's nothing better than a hot coffee and an awesome book. Join us for our virtual book club where we take one book a month and dive into all the drama, adventure, and romance we can find. Hi, Catherine.
Hey, Kristen.
So we're going a little bit off topic today with our little intro chat, just because there's been some news that we wanted to talk about. So there's been a little bit of Ali Hazelwood news. So last month we read the book Bride by Ali Hazelwood, and there is a follow-up book to that one that is coming out. And we got a cover reveal in the past week or so, 2 weeks.
Yeah, something like that.
And did we know the title before? I don't know if we did.
I think the title came out a few days before the cover. It was all very at the same time.
Right. So the title of the follow-up sequel to Bride is called Mate. And that is going to follow Misery's bestie, Serena, and her interaction with Lowe's sort of father figure bestie, Cohen.
Which is funny because we were literally talking about, I wonder what the age gap in this is.
Yeah, so, and then you said that there's been a little bit of, I guess, drama surrounding her newest book announcement release that she's coming out with.
I guess like when her last book came out, which was literally last month.
Not deep end, 3 weeks ago.
It just came out. So when that came out, she did some press tours, and that's when she announced that Bride 2, i.e. Mate, was coming out in October.
Mm-hmm.
But even before that comes out in October, I think it was earlier last week maybe, that we got that there's another book coming out May 27th, which is kind of insane, releasing 3 books in 1 year, but
it is. And do you know what, though? I feel sort of bad because when we discuss Jennifer L. Armentrout or Armentrout or whatever,
mm-hmm.
I diss her so hard for releasing so many books a year. And Ali Hazelwood's doing it, and I'm like, it's fine.
You know what? The thing with Ali Hazelwood's books that I find, all of her books are, what's the word? They're all very, even the fantasy-ish book.
They follow the same
They're set in the same time. They're all set in the present time.
Yes.
The present technology.
Yes.
The present vernacular.
Yeah.
My biggest issue with JLA is when you're reading her books and one of the characters says something, but it's kind of old-timey and there's no technology or electricity, but then someone's saying something super common and it pulls me out of the book.
Come at me, bro.
Yeah, something there's a specific scene where they're in a spa-ish area. I can't remember words for it. A hot spa.
A hot spring or something, yeah.
Hot spring, yeah. And it's a sex scene, and she says something, and I'm like, that can't be said. That doesn't make any sense. And it just took me completely out of the book, and I think that was my downfall with it. But I feel like books like that need more editing than books that have simpler worlds. So
yeah. And
Ali Hazelwood's mostly are just
boy meets girl, boy loves girl, they have a misunderstanding, they end up together.
Yeah, and they're all set in the same universe, other than Bride, I guess. Because there's little the couple in the first book did a cameo in the most recent book, which is real fun.
Oh,
so,
okay.
They're all kind of set within the same space, so she already has her world, which is just our world developed. So I feel like it's easier for her to put out more books, but 3 books is still insane. Not saying that
yeah,
it's still,
But they are, like, a simpler, like, plot line, right?
Mm-hmm,
they are
exactly.
smaller, romantic, like, they're romance books. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, like, they all follow a very similar H-E-A.
Yeah, HAE.
Happily After Ever.
It still works.
But they...
if they're immortal.
But, like, it's true. They all follow a very similar formula as to... And you're really just taking out all the names and, like, occupations, putting in different names and occupations, and boom, new book.
Yeah.
So, like, it is definitely quicker. And her books are shorter, too. To get more out. Yeah. But anyway, back to the drama surrounding it.
Oh, yeah.
The whole reason we started talking about it.
We just went way off rails there. So, yeah. Problematic summer romance is between the main male character of one of her other books. I want to say Not in Love, but I'm not 100% sure if that's the one.
Okay.
They all kind of get mixed up in my head.
Yes, of course.
But the male main character in a different book had a sister who was younger. That sister was in love with his best friend, but the best friend is, like, not going there with a 10-foot pole because he's like, that's wrong.
Right.
And this book is basically about them. So it's an age gap for sure. She's like 23 and he's, I think, 38. So a lot of people are losing it, about the age gap. Because she's not 25 yet, and she's not a real adult.
So, like, is it just the books that I'm reading wherein the majority of the relationships are that way?
Yeah.
He's, like, 35, and she's, like, 23, 24.
Mm-hmm.
But she's wise beyond her years.
Yeah. And, like, I wouldn't necessarily want Lily to read this as a teenager and be like, I should find somebody a bajillion years older than me. But the book is not for her.
No.
So, like, you know, I don't know. It's just all of these fantasy books we read too that are the most popular crack on the face of the planet. Like, how old is Feyre? She turned 18 in the book, did she?
19, I believe.
Oh, 19.
19 turning 20, I think, on her birthday. Yeah, and, like, Reese is, like, 500.
Yeah.
So,
it's
like,
the same with all of those books.
Yeah. The man is, like, ancient, but it's okay. For some reason, I wonder, like, what the plot, like, I would love to see a graph of, like, age of the girl, age of the guy, when it's okay, when it becomes not okay, and then when it becomes okay again. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
If the girl's, like, 15, 16, the guy should also be 15, 16. When the guy starts getting older and she's 15, 16, then as he gets older, it's, not okay. And then she gets older, and then it's sort of a little bit more okay, and then all of a sudden she's in her early 20s, and the guy's in his 30s. Oh, that's not okay anymore. Then it's probably still not okay if she's in her 20s, and he's 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Then it gets weird. But then as soon as he's probably, like, 150, like, with Twilight, when he's, like, 90 and she's 16, 17, it's
she's
okay.
School.
It's okay again. Like, I would love to see that graphed. Like, when people think it's okay. And, like, to be fair, it's a fantasy book. It's not real life.
Well,
like,
last
Edward,
week we also got the ages of this book.
Yes!
Speaking of age gaps. He's 1733. That is 4 numbers in an age.
Yes, he's almost 2,000 years old, and she's 24.
Yeah, so...
I don't see anybody freaking out.
No. But also, Leonardo DiCaprio is with a different 21-year-old every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And, like, I do think people realize that that's not cool, especially since he's not, like, falling in love with one, and then he literally is getting rid of them when they turn 22 and getting a new one.
Yeah.
I think people realize that's not cool, but they're not as up in arms about that, it doesn't seem like, as they are about this non-fiction, or no, this fiction, this fiction book about a couple with a age gap. It's just, I don't know.
And, like, if she's 23 and he's 38, that's a 15-year age gap. And while it's not amazing, like, it's not like he's old, like, the stretch, he could be old enough to be her father, but it's extremely unlikely. He would have had to be, like, a very young dad.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know. What am I reading? Because literally, the books I read, the girl is, like, in her early 20s and the guy is old enough to be her dad. I'm like, yes.
It's her boyfriend's dad in a lot
of
the books. Her literally had this conversation a few weeks ago.
Ex-boyfriend's father. Like, I've read so many books like that. So I'm like, I'm sorry.
Well, like, Fisher could be her great
ancestor. Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of years in there.
There's a lot of years in there.
So, yeah, it's just interesting when age gaps matter and
when they don't.
Yeah. Because it's like, it's the wild part of it is the books, like, ACOTAR was marketed as YA.
Yeah.
So, like, that age gap is wild for, like, children to be reading, but it's just brushed over because it's like immortality doesn't matter.
Yeah. It, like, in years, they're 1,000, but in emotional, like, maturity, they're, like, 20. So it's okay.
If that. So, yeah, it's just a bit weird that people care so much about this book when, like, there are people that are in relationships that are 23 and with somebody in their 30s. Mm-hmm. So, like, and it can be healthy. It's not like every relationship like that is bad or grooming or that kind of stuff. Like, there are healthy relationships between people that have age gaps. And I'm sure, like, Deep End just came out and it was kind of about BDSM, but it was, like, super introductory almost. It wasn't very hardcore.
Yeah. It was, so, like, yeah.
People complained about it not being enough and people complained about it being too much because, like, she can't do anything right for people, apparently.
Yeah.
But she wrote it in a way that, like, I thought was really good, and it was a good introduction to it for a couple that are in university and are young. So I feel like she's probably going to write this book in a way that she literally called the book Problematic Summer Romance. So, like, I think she gets it.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm excited to read it. Although the way it's titled makes me worry that it's not going to be a happily ever after.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
So,
but she writes romance, so it has to be.
I don't know. I'm going to let you read it first.
Well, yeah, I will.
Before I touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah. Well, if it's marketed as romance, this is another big discussion that's happening on, that I've seen on, like, Instagram and Threads and stuff. Of, like, if it's a romance genre book, it has to end with a happily ever after. That's just part of the romance genre. You can have a romance in a book, but if it doesn't end in happiness, then it's not a romance genre. But with, like, multiple books in a romance series, does each book need to end with a happily ever after for it to be romance, or is it just the overarching story that has to end in happily ever after?
Oh, that's a good question.
Right? I was like, I'm getting philosophical now reading these questions.
This should be our next week's discussion.
We'll take a week to think about it.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Put a pin in that.
Tune in next week. When you get our musings on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, we'll get started now, finally. So just a heads up, this is not a spoiler-free zone, and things might get saucy. So last week, obviously, we started Quicksilver. This is our second week. We're doing chapters 12 to 20. Last week, we met all the main players, I guess. Saeris is a human, which obviously makes us sad because how is a human going to live long enough to be in love with a 1,733-year-old man?
Yes.
And she lived in a human world with 2 sons and a human-ish queen that is over 1,000 years old, which is not normal in this world.
No.
But does give me hope that she'll live long enough, you know. It's like if the queen can live to 1,000, she can live forever too.
Maybe she'll tell her secrets.
Yeah. So, basically she stole a gauntlet from a guard, and then her brother got them caught because he's an idiot and we don't like him.
Nope.
And then she was like, it was me, it wasn't him, and they believed her, so they took her and let him go, just willy-nilly. Like, didn't care.
No.
Which was surprising, but, you know, obviously what she wanted. So she gets taken back to the castle. The queen is like, it's the Fae, they're coming for me, because she's paranoid. And then Holden, is that his name? Holden is her brother. Yeah. Holden is
the guy
that tried to kill her. Yeah. So he stabs her and basically kills her. And I, first time reading it, was like, shit, she's dead. What happens now?
What's the whole series gonna be?
Yeah. Oh, we're gonna get a new main character. It would be interesting.
It would be, yeah.
But anyway, so he stabs her, and then she is able to control metal in his dagger and, like, melt it and get it to attack him. And then she goes over and finds a sword just, like, in the ground and pulls it out, Excalibur style, and basically kills him, but also wakes up the Quicksilver in the process. And then Death comes and finds her and brings her to a fairy realm where she's healed magically.
Yes.
And then she ends up meeting the king, who's a dick, and the king almost kills Fisher, who we then actually meet. We also meet Lane, who is a sweet girl. She's not a girl, but that's what I said. A sweet female. That sounds wrong too. And Renfis, I think it is.
Renfis, yeah.
Yeah, I'm calling him Ren anyway. We meet him too. He seems hot. So they decide they're going to teach her about being an alchemist, and Fisher says he's going to take her to the forge. And we also get that there's, like, they have vampire fangs, basically, and they used to drink human blood, which sounds like it's going to be something. I've actually finished the book by now, so I'm, like, trying not to be too spoilery. But anyway, so this week, we're just in the forge. So it's... Oh, we also got last week that she just needs to go to the pool and think of where she wants to go, and it'll take her there. So...
But she needs...
a relic, or she'll go crazy.
Yes.
So that's kind of what she's thinking now. So it's like the next day. But she's in the forge, and it's hot in there, and she's distracted by his sweat. And he just tells her she could have said hello before I fucking him. And, like, there's a lot of this. They're very much attracted to each other.
And he is... That's sort of the funny part, is, like, they are very much, like, attracted to each other, but he also is very much, like, calls her out on it. He doesn't, like, keep it quiet that...
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's very much, like, he's, like... He notices when she's, like, looking at him in a sort of a way, and he calls her out, and it's just sort of like he has no
need to.
He has no tact.
Yeah.
You know what I mean about it. So. And
we also get, of course, these fays can smell when you're turned on.
Yeah.
Of course they can.
Of course.
So...
But can I just be honest, though, and say that, like, I do appreciate how she has written
those scenes.
Because, like, we have talked about it so many times, about how, like, well, if she's turned on and he's turned on, and they're turned on, and then other people, like, can other people, and is it awkward? And in this book, yes they can, and yes it is.
Yes it is. Yeah.
So it's like,
that's a good point.
It's not shying away from that.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
Yeah, I agree. I also like that she thinks she hates him because he's being a dick to her. So she's like, I hate him so much, but I'm just physically so attracted to him, is what she's. And I'm like, I just love that. I think it's the funniest thing ever.
Yeah, and she doesn't want to be attracted to him.
No, which I also love it. So we get a bit here where he kind of says that the Fae are oath-bound to tell the truth, but it's just kind of like brushed over a bit. We get more about it later in the book, but because he just kind of says it as in passing, and she doesn't fully believe it. But I was like, oh, because last week we had talked about it, and I was like, it kind of seems like he has to tell the truth. And I was like, do we ever get that? So there was a vague mention of it at the beginning of chapter 12. So, but we do get more later. He then just like shakes the sweat off of his head like a dog. And she's just like, that's disgusting. And he says that she's lying. And we're like, okay, good to know. And then she tells him to call her by her name or nothing at all. And he just says that she's temporary. And this is his big, like, gripe with her, I guess, is that she's human and she's going to die. And it kind of all starts to make sense later. You're like, oh, I get why he's pissed that she's human. But it is annoying. And he is a bit of a dick.
Yeah, he's not super kind.
No. Which also makes sense by the end of the book, too. But, you know, it's shitty.
Yeah.
But he just says she's temporary, so it isn't practical to learn the names of humans. And then he starts calling her nothing at all, because she said call her by her name or nothing at all. And she's like, nah, I should have seen that coming. And I actually expected it to last longer than it does. This book kind of took a turn this week, and I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting... Like, I don't know. I just expected them to stay where they were, learn a bit more.
Yeah.
To go kind of like that. But it kind of takes a turn, and I'm like, holy shit, we're getting into it. But he shows her what he's been working on, and she literally goes to, like, poke the inside of the crucible, and he's like, I thought you said you've worked in forges before. You almost just burnt your hand off. Like, you can't just stick your finger in, like hot shit.
Molten hot metal.
Yeah. And she's like... shit. And she realizes that, like, Ilroy would have kicked her out of the forge if she did this back home. Like, that was really stupid, but she was just so distracted by him and just being stupid. And she's like, fuck. So then he tells her that there's Fae bone in the crucible, and he's trying to figure out how to recreate a relic. And she asks if he's trying to fuse the bone to the Quicksilver to trick it into thinking it's like a part of the Quicksilver. And he's just like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So a lot of this book is like trying to figure out how to make relics. And the Quicksilver doesn't necessarily want to mix with things. Mm-hmm. She then like realizes they're not alone and starts to panic. And Fisher turns into smoke and like takes out his sword and ends up on the other side of the room. And then he's like, it's just a fox. And she's like, she has actually never seen one. And he's like, you just made me move like that when I'm hungover and I didn't want to. But it kind of shows that like he's protective of her. And he raises his sword then to like kill the fox basically. And she stops him. And he says it's a pest, but she goes over to protect it, and he says it's going to bite her, and then it does bite her. And, of course, they carry diseases, and Fisher's just like, that was stupid. Mm-hmm. But he tells her that it would make a good hat, and she growls at him, and so does the fox. And then, like, she talks to the fox a bit, and eventually the fox lets go, and then hides under her skirt. And Fisher's just like, finally, a good use for such a pretty doll in a pretty dress, because obviously she's been in dresses this whole time. And she says that she was wearing pants and a shirt and good boots that cost her. Because obviously we know how she lived, but he's like, he just guesses. He's like, oh, what did you give up? Your virginity for them? And she's just like, fuck off.
Yeah.
Well, she says, fuck you. And he says he would, but doesn't have boots to pay her. And you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
So she goes to lunge for him to punch him again, I guess. But the fox, like, claws her leg. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, this fox. So then Fisher magics the fox into a cage and then magics her into pants and a shirt and gives her a dagger, which is fun. And then he asks if she needs help with it. And he takes off his shirt and she's completely overwhelmed by, like, he's fully tattooed and she's overwhelmed by his tattoos. I know, I love it so much. And he has a wolf in, like, the middle of his chest where he normally wears that plate that has a wolf on it. So we're like, there's something to that, but we don't get it yet. And she's just, like, completely distracted. And he just tells her that Ren can help her train. But she just says she already knows how to use knives. So they spend the next hours, like, trying to get the Quicksilver to bond with the bone, I guess. But it doesn't work. And then the Quicksilver starts to mock her. She's like, great. She also, during this time, keeps staring at Fisher because, of course, she would. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have a shirt on, and he's hot as fuck. Mm-hmm. And she wants to know about his tattoos, and he's super beautiful. So she also just, at one point, is like, can I hold the pendant to feel how it's made? Because she's like, obviously, we know she's trying to get a relic. But also, she's like, if I feel it, maybe I'll be able to recreate it, is what she's telling him.
Yeah.
And he tells her to come over and touch it, and she asks if he could take it off, but he says the last time he took it off, he was in a room with 3-foot walls and an iron door. And she's like, oh, shit. And at this point, you're like, you can't take his necklace. He's going to actually die.
Yeah.
What is your plan here? So he sits facing her and, like, opens his legs, and she has to stand between them, and she touches the pendant, and she thinks of how it's wet. And that it's wet with his sweat, and she wants to smell it, and it's like,
she's very
into him.
Yeah.
We kind of get a bit about the differences between Fae and humans. He says they're pretty similar, but Fae have a few extra internal organs. Interesting. And they are bigger, and they have bigger hearts, and their eyesight is better, their sense of smell is better, and their hearing is obviously better. They can hear each other's heartbeats. And then he has her feel his, like, heart beating steady, and he says her heart betrays her when she's around him. He's like, whenever you look at me, your heartbeat goes up. And it's kind of something that comes up a few times about, like, her heartbeat and stuff. He pins her between his legs then, and she panics, and she asks him to let her go, and he immediately does. Like, of course.
Of course he does. He's all over the consent.
Yeah. But he's still, like, touching her back. And he tells her he's fucked plenty of humans, and she's surprised because of how much he seems to hate humans. But he says he doesn't hate them. They're just so breakable that if he fucked her the way he's imagining it now, she wouldn't survive. So I do like that it's not completely one-sided. He's not, like, making her feel bad for wanting him. Because he's admitting that he wants her too. He's being a dick about it. But he's also, like, he does want to fuck her too. So I appreciate it a bit more. I feel like it would be less embarrassing.
I guess.
She starts to say that she wouldn't. And she says that she's afraid of him, but he's like, no, you're not. I can tell. And he says that she wants to touch him, and he runs his nose, like, along her chin to her ear and says her body is betraying her. And he also says He wants to drink the nectar straight from the source.
Woo!
Some things are meant to be read in your head. That line was one of them.
I don't hate it.
So she goes to punch him, and he just laughs and asks if she wants to know what he tastes like. And then he says if she tries to punch him again, he'll tie her hands behind her back. And then he's just like, you should kiss me. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? She just tried to punch you, but this is where we're going. But he says that she wants him, and he won't move. So she's just like, fine. And she kisses him. And I'm like, what is happening? What is going on? But of course, the kiss is immediately incredible. And he kisses her back, but he doesn't, like, move his hands around. And, like, obviously, he smells like mint and smoke. And she loves that. And she thinks she hates him, but she wants him even more. And he groans, and she, like, bites at his lips. And she sighs, and he tells her to be careful because he didn't promise to show restraint if she climbed on top of him and grinded into him. And she's just mortified because she didn't even realize she climbed into his lap. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. Yeah. But she can feel that he's, like, hard beneath her. And she just moves away. And he says, like, he didn't mind, but that's the line. Like, basically, if she's going to jump in his lap, then he's going to start moving, too. Like, okay. So they're literally just going to have sex in this forge.
I was secretly hoping that they would.
Yeah. Definitely. But she says there won't be a next time. And she just tells him to leave. And he says he'll get Ren to walk her if she promises to wait. And he feels her heart again and says that it's like a hummingbird. And he tells her to get the bite checked. Because obviously the fox bit her, you know, diseases and stuff. And then he just becomes smoke and disappears.
Hilarious.
And yeah. And then Saeris just starts running. And I'm like, wait, what? What is happening? But she runs down and down and down. And last week she heard that, like, the Quicksilver is below the palace. So every tunnel leads to it, basically, is what the librarian, whose name I forget, said.
Yeah, I also forget.
Yeah, it's fine. So she has a bag with food, water, and clothes, and now a fox in it. I'm like, you can't bring a winter fox back to your home.
Back to a desert?
Okay. Yeah.
Who says?
Also, you don't have a relic for the fox.
Oh, yeah, the poor foxy.
Yeah. So she gets to the bottom, and then there are 3 soldiers guarding the tunnel. But the Quicksilver wants her to find it and tells her to come a different way. And she thinks at this moment, like, she could go back and pretend she didn't do this. And, like, in less than a week's time now, Kingfisher would leave and she'd start working with somebody else. And it doesn't give her the relief she thinks she would have. She doesn't want to meet somebody else. She's, like, enjoying her time with Kingfisher, even though she hates him.
Yeah, even though he's a dick.
Yeah. Guards come around the corner then, and she, like, hides in shadows in an alcove. And I'm like, is he hiding her? Is he just there in shadow form and he's helping hide her because she's hiding in shadows? Because that's what I took from that. But then she's able to sneak around towards the Quicksilver, and she's still, like, hearing it talk to her. And the fox is super scared because doesn't like it. So she goes through a smaller tunnel and gets to, like, a giant pool of Quicksilver. And she starts to walk forward without realizing that she is, which is always a good sign. And the fox is, like, thrashing in her bag, so she, like, lets him out, and he just jets and leaves. Yeah. And I'm like, is he going to get Kingfisher?
He's like, I don't want to be anywhere near here.
But she's just like, it's probably for the best. I couldn't really bring him to a desert. He's made for cold.
Yes.
So I'm just like, yeah,
and,
that's
like,
true.
She has to fight for water. You can't have a pet.
Exactly. So the pool pulls her towards it, and she reaches to the silver in her mind and tells it to wake up, and it does. And it tells her to come, and she does, and she hovers like her foot over it, and then she's wondering where she's supposed to be going. And I'm like, did you just forget that you're trying to go home? Because that's what it seems like. I'm like, that's not great. It's not easy to remember where you're hoping to go if you're just gonna forget it. That's not ideal. So the tip of her slipper hits the water, and then a wall of black hits her and pulls her back, and it's Fisher. Of course
it is.
And he has his sword out, and he says she was leaving without saying goodbye, and she says she doesn't owe him anything, and he says she owes him her life. And I mean, he's like,
she does.
Oh yeah, yeah. And he's like terrifying in that moment, and she's actually afraid of him. And he pins her with the sword to her throat and says, Rule 3 of being hungover is no physical activity, and he had to run after her, so he's
pissed.
He's pissed, but it's still kind of funny. Then he calls her a lying thief, and we get that she stole his ring. And she says she didn't lie and tries to move the sword away from her neck, but she touches, I guess, the blade of it, and it just completely chars her hand black. And I'm like, that would be so painful.
So that's the sword that she pulled out originally, right?
No. This is Nimril.
Right.
So it's Fisher's sword that he's always had.
So where's the sword that she pulled out? Does
the King
have it? Okay.
Yeah.
Does King have it? Yep.
Does King have it?
There's
yes.
my English for the day.
I liked it. And she starts like crying because it was painful, and also because she's wasn't able to leave.
Yeah.
Like, it's all a disaster. She was caught. And he's just like, I would have told you, but you don't listen anyway. And I'm like, that is so shitty. You just like charred the shit out of her hand.
Yeah.
Like, this is a moment that I was just like, how am I ever going to like him?
I know. And again, this is one of those moments that I found him in this location challenging.
Yes. So he says that she lied with her body while she was kissing him. And she's just says that she has to go back, but he tells her the ring isn't a relic. And she's shocked because, like, he's implied the entire time we've known him that, like, he was fine because he had the ring. But he was just like, no, Everlane just believed that. I didn't actually say it. And we're like, okay. And she says he's traveled without it, and he did to save her. And he laughs, and he said he did it for himself. And this is another moment where he's kind of like, if you couldn't wake the Quicksilver, I would have let you die. Like, reinforcing this constantly. And she just says, like, if he could travel without a relic, she can do it. But he says that he's stronger than her and has, like, mind shields, and her mind would have exploded if she tried.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah. But she says she can't give up, and he says that she's staying, and she's going to figure out the relics if it's the last thing she does. And you're like, this is not helpful.
No, he's not being very kind.
He's not at all. But she promises she won't, and she says that he can torture her, but she refuses to do anything until she knows what happened. And he just says, like, it won't be him torturing her, it'll be Belicon. And he can't even withstand it.
Yikes.
And she's just like, she tells him to listen to her heart and see that she's telling the truth, that she is going to refuse to do anything until she figures it out. So he, I guess, realizes that
bitch ain't fooling around.
Yeah, she's fine with dying. She just needs to know what happened to her brother. And he says, fine, I'll get you one. And I was like, no, I don't want another human here. I'm so mad.
Yeah.
But he says he'll get her one human, and in return, she'll make the relics, and she asks for 2. She wants Eelroy to come too. But he kind of just says, like,
no.
He can only bring one human back at a time. He has one relic, and he can't do this twice. That would be insane. And he would also die because he can't travel twice without it. It wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Then he says that they need to seal the deal with blood, and she uses her dagger to, like, cut her hand a teeny tiny bit. And then we get the wording. And immediately I was like, you're a fucking idiot.
I know.
But
if there's anything we've learned,
yes,
it's wording matters.
Nobody gave her the pep talk that they gave Feyre before Under the Moon. But he says that he'll try to get her brother, and in return, she will assist him and do as she's told. And she just agrees, like an idiot. And then she's bound by death to do it. And we're like, this is not good.
No. It's not good for her, but you know, yeah. It's the entire plot of the book. This one moment becomes the entire plot, so
yeah. So he asked for something of Hayden's, and then she's like, I don't have anything. Obviously, where would she get something? But they have the same parents, so he's like, I'll just use your blood. And then he tells her to close the silver when he's gone and open it in an hour. And she just says, like, she should leave it open just in case he, like, needs to get back. But he says that if this Quicksilver is awake, all the Quicksilver's awake, so, like, a horde of feeders could just burst on through this pool and attack her. And she's like, oh, okay. And we're like, what the fuck's a feeder? So he armors himself up and tells her he'll lay waste to the city if she traps him there. Which would just be kind of funny if she did.
I mean, to be fair, though, he knows her, like, you know what I mean? Like, the fact that he, like, quantified, like, you leave me here, I will lay waste to the city. Like, that is a surefire way for her to be like, okay, I will promise I will open it for you.
Yeah. Like, her whole thing is worrying about her brother, so.
Yeah.
And she also, was it last week? She was like, I need to go back and help them. And he's like, it's not your job. But anyway, so he goes through, and she has to try 4 times to still the Quicksilver, and then she finally gets it to sleep, I guess. And she wonders if Fisher will just end up killing her brother to, like, be done with it. And I'm like, you clearly don't understand what he just said. Like, he's bound by that too. Yes, he said he'll try, but he wouldn't be able to kill him if he's supposed to be trying to get him back.
But again, she doesn't understand the whole...
And she really doesn't. It's real bad. And then she's wondering if he would just lie about it and go somewhere else and then just come back in an hour. And I'm like, he also already told you he couldn't lie, but okay. So she just sits there and waits, and the fox comes back and, like, curls around her, and it's just the cutest little fox ever, and I want one. And she names him Onyx because of his eyes, but he's, like, all white with little black tips on his ears, and he's so cute. So she decides an hour has passed, and before she gets the silver all the way awake, he's just, like, exploding out of it. And we're like, okay. And Nimrel is bloody, and he has a body, and he shouts that he needs the pendant quickly. So she gets it off of her brother and gives it to him. And he says, fuck me, that was bad. And then he tells her to close the gates. So she
does.
Puts it to sleep again, yeah. He says he's never doing it again, and she kneels next to Hayden, but she's like, what the fuck? This is Carrion Swift. And I was like, you know what? I'm fine with it.
I love it.
I didn't want it to be Hayden.
No.
And, like, Carrion could be fun. But yeah, I was also like, obviously we need some jealousy here, so that's why it's Carrion. But Fisher says that he tracked
her
to Carrion, so assumed it was Hayden, and he said he was Hayden, and she's like, well, did you have a sword to his throat? And he's like, no, I just had him in a headlock. Okay. And then he says, like, the Quicksilver obviously lets out in Madra's palace, and there are a bajillion guards there, so he had to fight his way out, and then fight his way back in, which seems wild in an hour that he was able to do all of that, but...
And hot.
So hot. But he says... but he says, like, the deal stands, and that he got stabbed 7 times for her, and I'm just like, Jesus. And she's just like, I won't go back to my rooms. But he says, we're not going back to your rooms. We're going to find a healer, and then Ren, and then we're getting out of here. And I was like, wait, what the fuck is happening? So she follows him up like a shit ton of stairs, and she can't stop her body from following him. And we're like, we know why. Mm-hmm. You're so dumb.
She is. Like, she's just, yep, she's dumb.
Not very smart to blood oath something. So they get to a door, basically, and he lays Carrion down, and then he tells her to stay here and not make a sound. And she starts trying to, like, curse him out, but she can't say anything. And you're like, fuck. And I think this is finally when she's actually, like, realizing, because he leaves her there for, like, an hour. But when he comes back, he's healed, and he says he left a note for Ren, and he just grabs Carrion and goes, but she doesn't follow him. And he tells her to keep up, and she's allowed to talk, but she's not allowed to complain. Which is kind of funny. I kind of love it. So they get to the stables, and she just says no. And he's like, what, are you afraid of horses? And she's like, we mutually dislike each other, which is just funny. And he's just like, well, you're gonna have to get over it. And he says, like, she made a pact and she's coming with him. And she says she swore to help the Fae. And he's like, no, actually, you swore to do whatever I asked you to. And it's just like, ugh.
Yeah.
Obviously. And she argues that that's not what she meant, but it obviously
doesn't matter.
So he just tells her that she's getting on the horse, and she says he tricked her, but he says it's a lesson. And I'm like, it is a lesson.
Yes.
Real shitty lesson, but it is.
Yep. Don't make promises to the Fae.
Exactly. And you'd think she'd learn. So they go outside, and it's snowing, and she's just like, this is wild, because it's just like water falling from the sky, and like they fight over water back home, and like it's just surprising to her.
Yeah. And
then she looks up and she's like, what are those? And he's like, they're stars. And he tells her that the stars are like the suns in Zilverin, and like Quicksilver moves you between them, so like they could be looking up at Zilverin's suns right now in their starry sky, which is interesting. And I wonder, like, is that true? Or is that just what he thinks?
Yeah.
I don't know. But we're taking it as truth almost, so that's fun.
Yeah.
And
the thing that I don't understand is, how does she not know what stars are?
Because they don't have night. It's 2 suns.
Right.
All the time.
I forgot.
It's fair.
I totally forgot about that bit. I'm like, it's never... How do they sleep?
I guess you just get used to it.
I guess.
I'm assuming nighttime there's only 1 sun up. I don't know, though. Like, it seems insane. It would still be so hot. That world seems awful.
Yeah, I wouldn't be a fan.
He tells her then that Ren is going to meet them, and then he gives her a warm cloak, and he just, like, puts her on the horse, and they argue about it, of course, but he's just like...
Nope.
He's like, move your leg this way, move this way. And then he puts a bag on her horse and tells her not to touch it. And obviously she just does everything he asks. And then she asks for her bag, but he says she doesn't need it. But she's just like, no, I do. So he gets it. And he says if the rodent is an issue, he's going to skin it. And he says that the fox should be running beside them anyway. It shouldn't be like in the bag. It's like, it is it's made for the cold. But she's like, no, which I'm here for it. She tells him then to worry about his cargo because it's
when
Carrion.
did she put the fox in the bag?
I guess when they left the pool.
All right.
Because it was around her belly.
All right.
So yeah, she tells him to worry about his cargo, obviously Carrion, and he asks if she's sure it isn't her brother. Like, obviously.
Like, I'm pretty sure I would know.
Yeah. And then I was like, shit, is he gonna turn out to be related to her? Because we already got that they had sex. I'm like, that would be weird. Yeah. And then he asks why they can't just leave him. And she's like, he would obviously be killed as soon as they realize that she was kidnapped. And he says that she's going willingly. And she's like, I'm really not. And then he says that she's ending a war. So congratulations on sainthood. It's just like, you're being a bit of a dick. But obviously it would have been like, I can't even imagine if they did leave Carrion there. It would have been wild. So anyway, her horse just follows his, and she just watches Carrion like bumping around on the back of his horse, and she's like, he deserves it. Which is just funny. They end up going through like a super dark forest, and they hear wailing, and at one point she screams, and Fisher's just like, what is going on? And it's like, there are noises in the forest. She's not crazy but she's like, obviously I'm afraid we're gonna die.
Yeah.
And he's like, they're just shades. And she's like, so ghosts? And he's like, I don't know what those are, but he says they're non-corporeal and they can't hurt her. They're basically just reliving their deaths. Yeah. Which just made me think of Supernatural and Death Echoes.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that's what they are. And he says that she can watch, like, and see it. Like, you can just see them doing it. And she's like, I can't. I'm human, and I cannot see that well in the dark. And he just offers to give her temporary sight. And she's like, no, I'd rather not be able to see how they died. Like, I'd rather be in the dark.
Yes.
And you're like, fair. But he tells her not to feel too bad for them because this is apparently a prison. I'm like, okay.
Oh, it's like a prison of, like a forest prison.
Yeah. So I'm like, is that gonna be a thing at some point, possibly? So they keep going, and she asks how much longer, and he says if they trot, it'll be faster, but she refuses to smash herself against the horse any faster than she is.
Yeah.
And he offers to kiss it better.
Woo!
And says that, like, his mouth has been known to have healing properties, especially when between thighs, and you're like, ugh, you're so cocky.
I love it. I'm like, yes.
And yeah. And she says she's surprised that he'd offer that when the last time they, I guess, kissed or did anything, she stole something from him. And he says he knew all along that she was up to something. And she's like, no way, you did not. And he's like, well, you had a bag full of food and clothes, so I figured it out. And she's like, you looked through my stuff? Like, of course.
But, like, but also, how would you not notice somebody taking a ring off of your finger?
Yeah, but it's the same as, like, she would steal back in her hometown. It's like, she got good at, like, sleight of hand and stuff. So, I don't know. And I still don't know if I believe that he actually knew she was taking it or realized afterwards. Not sure. So she says she knows he was distracted. She felt how hard and then she just trails off.
Yes.
Of course. And he asks what? And she just says his hands were all over her. And he says that his hands have a mind of their own, but he knew what she was doing. And she goes over to, like, try to kick him. But he's like, if you kick Bill, he's gonna bolt. And she's like, your horse's name is Bill?
I really like it.
Me too. It's great. So they keep going, and they eventually get to a pub, and a stable hand takes the horses and then offers money for Onyx. And she's just like, no, you can't have him. And then offers money for Carrion, which is just so funny. But they basically say that, like, neither are for sale. And Fisher would have sold both of them, though.
Of course he would.
Yeah. But he tells the stable hand to keep the human alive and basically, like, threatens him. So they go inside of a pub, and there are, like, a bunch of different types of fae. Like, we get a few descriptions, but there's just lots of different kinds. And they all have different characteristics and stuff. And then there's, like, little fairies that are, like, small, flying around her head, and she swats at them. But Fisher tells her that they're mean when they're drunk, and she says that she could crush them, and then one bites her hand because, like, obviously they also speak the same language and heard it. And Fisher's just like, I told you so. And you're like, you're being a dick still.
What a shock.
Yeah. But he orders 2 beer and then asks for the strongest shot they have. And I'm like, fuck, is he getting loaded? And then they luck into a table, and Onyx just, like, darts under it. And it's really cute. I love him so much.
I love how quickly he became, like, attached to her. He's like, I will bite you, and now I love you.
Yeah. I am yours and you are mine. So she sits down, and obviously it hurts because she's just been on a horse forever. And he just laughs at her and says that she's been a pain in his ass, so it's funny, and he's enjoying it. Like, great. And then he just, like, grabs her arm, and she tries to pull it back, but he says she's been bitten by a fox and a fairy and burnt by a sword, and isn't from here, so they need to, like, disinfect it. And then he dumps the liquor all over, like, her injuries. Yeah. And it sounds so fucking painful.
Yes.
And it's, like, violently, like, green. Like, I don't think... That doesn't sound like it would actually disinfect, but it just reminds me of sourpuss because I'm like the only violently green drink I can think of.
Yeah.
And she's just like kind of what we've been talking about. Like, that was unnecessarily cruel. She's like, she calls him sick and says that he enjoyed it, but he says it was necessary. And he says he doesn't enjoy hurting people, but sometimes he has to. And that she is important to keep his people alive. So that's it. But she just like thinks that, like, it doesn't mean you can't be kind.
Yeah.
Kind of what we've been saying this whole week. So he tells her that he will keep her with him to keep her alive. And it makes sense to her, but obviously he's still being an asshole. So she takes a sip of her beer, and it's delicious, but he tells her to be careful because it's strong, which annoys her because she thinks, like, she drinks whiskey, so it's not strong to her. And I'm like, fine, but you don't know what's in this. Like, there could be, like, fairy blood mixed in or something that, like, makes it 40% beer. Yeah. Like, don't just assume you can drink alcohol in a different place. A different world. I was like, oh my god, she's gonna end up loaded. Anyway, it's similar enough, we figure out. So,
which is shocking because they always are like, oh my god, they always make, like, fairy drinks so strong.
Fairy wine.
Yeah.
Which I'm fine with it. I didn't really need her to get fucking loaded in this moment.
No, it's fine.
Although I do find it fun. I like it. I know this is probably also problematic for me and the amount of drinking that's in our culture. But I did enjoy how much drinking is in this book, and I know that is also a problem.
Well, in my section, there's a focus on the wine, and, like, not really a purpose.
Well, I was wondering if there was something to it. I wanted to know if there was more. Like,
Yeah.
is this the wine that's gonna fuck her up because it has fairy blood in it? Like, what is happening?
But yeah, but like there's nothing. It was just, oh, I like the wine.
It's very tasty. And I'm like, fair enough. Wine is good.
Mm-hmm.
And like, did he bring out his best wine for her?
No.
Anyway, we can't get into that yet.
No.
We're not.
No,
there.
I know we're not.
So she asks him when Carrion is gonna wake up. And it's funny that his name is that now that I've finished the book. Because like, anyway, I just
We'll talk about it when we
in 2 weeks' time.
Yes.
But anyway, he says he doesn't know, but it shouldn't take as long as it took her because she was dying when she got here.
Valid.
Right? And she's like, okay, well, where are we going? And he says he's taking her to his home, to Kalish. And apparently, his father actually warded it so that Belican can't enter. And, like, he did that before he was even the piece of shit he is now. So, like, that's interesting. But she's just like, okay, so we're going to a war zone? How is that safe? And he tells her she'll need to stay real close to him. Like, ooh. She ends up drinking 3 beer, and she ends up feeding most of her food to Onyx because she's worried about her brother and wondering if he's dead because, like, obviously he's not here.
They didn't get the right person.
Yeah. Ren shows up, and she just feels relief, and I'm like, girl, you have too much faith in this man. Like, he's not going to take you away from Fisher either. But Ren goes over and hugs Fisher and says that he's officially fucked and that Lane is hella mad at him. And they get another round of beer and Fisher says it's Saeris' fault and she tried to commit suicide. And she says she didn't, but he says like she tried to go in the silver without a relic. And she's just like, she thought that she had one because she had his ring. And he's like, well, do you want to tell Ren how you got my ring? Which she obviously does not.
Although Ren ends up with far too much information for these two people.
Oh, yes, he does. And I'm sure Fisher told him afterwards what happened. They're very
open with each other.
Yeah. But Ren just says that Fisher took Belican's alchemist and the sword. So that's the sword that she pulled out, Solus. He took that sword too. And he says like the last time he had a sword of note, he killed the Dianthus line. So Fisher's kind of like, that's why he took it, because last time he had a sword that had power, this is what he did. But Ren's just like, the god swords are all dormant now. So there was no harm in him having it. And Fisher says he'll die before he lets Belican wear that sword, basically. And not all the swords are dormant. Not all the god swords are dormant. Nimril isn't. And Ren kind of just says that he took the Solus sword back because it's his father's sword. Like, he's like, we all know why.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And then Ren says that Nimril has been corrupted for years, which is interesting. And Fisher just says Nimril is the only thing standing between Evelia and everlasting darkness for the last 400 years.
Which is...
okay.
Interesting, like, to hear them talk about the swords as if they're, like, conscious, almost.
Yeah. And, like, what does that mean? Because, like, everlasting darkness, does that mean, like, because of everybody dying? Like, what does he mean? It's hard to talk about when...
the corruption, yeah, when we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So he got, like, super heated about that. And everyone, like, is looking at them. and then they start recognizing them. And then they start talking about Ren and then Fisher. And Fisher just whispers, fuck. And then Ren says, time to go. And Saeris looks at the crowd. But they just look shocked because she's, like, expecting a fight to break out or something for them to, like, hate him. Because, like, obviously, And last week, everyone was saying that the king should kill Fisher, so she's expecting something like that to happen now. Fair.
Absolutely fair.
And then the bartender just, like, drops a glass, and she's like, what the fuck is going on? So they get up to leave, and a warrior steps in front of Fisher and, like, drops to one knee and says it's an honor. And someone asks for a blessing, and he's just like, no, you're mistaking me for someone else. But then one person says, like, his cousin fought with him and his wolves, and he can't be anyone else. And Fisher says he's not who his cousin fought with anymore. And people just go around and, like, talk about all of his accomplishments and, like, how much they love him, basically. Yeah. And I didn't write them all down, but, like, he saved a bunch of these people's villages or cities. Like, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
And then they all just say Sarush, which is like a cheers to him. And he just says, like, that was a long time ago and he's not that person anymore. And he, like, walks outside, and she's just, like, surprised by how he acted because they all treated him like a god. And anyway, I guess her and Ren walk out too, and Fisher already has the horses ready, and there's a black vortex behind him. And Carrion is on the back of his horse, but he's missing one shoe, which is just funny. But she's too worried about the vortex to actually give a fuck. She pulls back from it, and he just tells her to follow Ren, and he'll go behind her. But she refuses, and he says it's a shadow gate, so it's either go through this or spend 2 months sleeping in ditches and scavenging for food. And she's like, okay, I'll do the second one, because I'm not walking through that. But he says she's going, and she starts backing away from it. And he asks if she's thinking of running, and he says it's been an age since he hunted anything. And I'm like, yep, I want to read that. 100%.
Yeah.
Then Ren says that she's scared, so give her a moment, which, like, obviously she's scared. But people start coming out of the pub, so he says Ren will go and she will follow, and her oath leaves her no choice. And Ren is just like, tell me I misheard that, and that you didn't bind her. And Fisher just says that they can talk about it later, but you can tell that Ren is, like, shocked about it, of course. And Ren then tells Saeris that there's nothing to worry about, and she'll be a bit disoriented, like, once she gets through, but then she'll feel fine. And Ren goes through, and she decides that, like, her strength of will is stronger than the oath, but
it's not.
It's not, of course. So she feels so powerless, and she, like, looks at him and says to him that she vows to hate him forever. And you're like,
sure,
this means something. So she goes through, and she, like, feels like she becomes darkness, and then there's pain everywhere, and then she vomits all over a stone floor, and then somebody just says that they have nothing ready, but Ren says it's okay just to take the horses, and that they need to give Fisher some time. And asks this person to, like, keep it to himself for now that Fisher's back. She sees Fisher walking away and vows to make the fucker pay. And then she kind of realizes that she's just, like, lying on the floor. And then she just throws up again. And Ren says he's sorry and offers a hand. And he tells her that this won't happen again. It just happens the first time you use the gates, which is just interesting.
Yeah.
And, like, normally it's just a little dizziness, but it obviously is different for humans. They just haven't seen one in a long time, so didn't realize it would affect her this badly.
Of course.
Yeah. But it is shitty of Fisher to just walk away while she's on the ground vomiting and feeling like shit. So she tells Ren not to apologize for him, and he says he's not what you think he is. And then Ren literally has to carry her because she can't get up. And she asks what about Onyx, but he says that he has him and he has her bag, which is good. And Ren tells her that he used to be kinder, but the Quicksilver is wearing on him and all of the voices. And he says, like, they aren't excuses for him, but the first time Belican made him travel without a relic, they all thought he was dead, and his mind was so fractured. And now, like, the relic isn't as effective as it used to be anymore. And he's also been through the Quicksilver twice now without it, so who knows how that will affect him. So I guess when he saved her and when he brought back Carrion.
Yeah.
And we're like, is it worth it for Carrion? What the fuck? So she asks then where Fisher was for the 110 years, but Ren says it isn't his story to tell. And, like, I guess she just ends up passing out and going to sleep. So she wakes up, and Carrion is talking to her and saying that the rabid animal is showing its teeth. And I love Onyx so much. So she ends up getting up and, like, rushes him and asks him what the fuck he was thinking, saying that he was Hayden. And he just is like, and she's like, is he alive? Like, what's going on? And he's like, of course Hayden's alive. And she says Madra said that she was going to destroy the third because of the gauntlet. And he's like, yeah, the gauntlet I told you not to keep in the third. He's being a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
But he does tell her that he actually moved Hayden to the 7th. He got him papers and a job as a store clerk, and he has triple water rations and a home above the shop. But he's not content with his life, and he's still trying to get back to her. It's like, he needs to fuck off.
Yeah. Like, yes. He's got a good life now.
Yeah.
Can I just say that I also love that he did that without her, like, without her having to, like, say anything to him or, like, do anything. He automatically got him somewhere safe.
Yeah. It kind of, like, does make you wonder, is he in love with her?
I
like,
know! I
don't know. But yeah. She starts to cry because she was so worried that he'd be dead, and now, like, he's safe and fine. So, like, that's great. But Carrion also says that Madra and her guards are too busy with the Evanlight to worry about Hayden, and the Guardians are actually building a stage in the third. And she's like, are you sure it's not gallows? And he's like, no, there are flowers. And that doesn't mean it's not gallows.
Yeah.
But she has to know everything. And he tells her that Elroy goes to the gates every day asking to see her, but they turn him away. And Hayden blames himself, as he should. And everyone in the third are all fine, and everything's just going on like normal.
Yeah. So her disappearance made no effect whatsoever on anybody.
Yes. It made her brother's life better.
She should have gotten herself captured earlier.
Right? So he says it's his turn for answers then. And he says, where are they? And then he says, we're the people that just came in and touched her, Faye. And then he asks, where's his boot? And she's just like, wait, what do you mean, people who touched me? And he's like, that's what you're going to answer me with, another question. But he says that they said that they were healing her. And she looks down, and, like, the bite marks are gone, and, like, the charred hand is healing. She looks around, and there's, like, food and water in the room, but Carrion didn't touch any of it. And Saeris is just kind of surprised. She's like, there's, like, lots of water here. Why didn't he? And then Saeris just tells him everything. And the first thing he says is, so you kissed him then? And it's just like, that's another, like, is he in love with her? What is going on?
It does seem like there's something going on.
Yeah. And it's just like that, yeah. But then he also calls Fisher insane. And he asks what she's even supposed to do, and she says, make relics, and he asks how, and Fisher cuts in and says he's about to tell her. And Carrion, like, angles himself in front of Saeris, which I just think is so sweet. Like, he's obviously, like, arguing with her, but he does care about her a lot.
Yeah.
Then Fisher says he's only half insane, and that she's bound to him, and that she's the only reason that Carrion is still alive. And Carrion just says that he thought she wasn't infatuated with him anymore. And I'm like, oh my god, this isn't going to go well. But he says he wanted to stay in Zilverin because he was about to close a deal that would make him really rich. And she looks over, and Fisher is holding the, like, pommel of his sword and looking between them and just, like, looking pissed, basically. But he tells her to come with him, and she pushes back, like, she doesn't want to go. But he says he has so much to do that figuring out her abilities to save countless of people so that they can go home ranks low on his list. And Carrion's like, well, when you put it like that, I do want to go home, so you should go with him. Sorry, I confused myself. Fisher admits then that, like, he doesn't want to force her to do it. He wants her to come on her own because his brother is pissed at him, which I just, like, it's so shitty, but I love Fisher and Ren's relationship and that he, like, listens to him, but it is shitty that, like, he had to tell him that it's wrong. He didn't just figure that out on his own. Like, obviously it's not great, but I like their relationship.
Yeah, and, like, he knows that he manipulated maybe the wrong he knows he took advantage of that oath. Like, he is well aware.
100%. Yeah. That's why he used the word try.
Mm-hmm.
So she then says one condition. He has to make a promise. And we're like, and she gives him the words. And she says he has to say, I swear I will release you and allow you and Carrion to return to Zilverin the moment you have enough relics for my people. So he says, as you wish, which I was like,
Princess Bride! I love it!
And then he says exactly those words. So obviously that's going to bite her in the ass soon too. But they go to leave, but Carrion just asks, what about him? They're going to leave him locked in here. But Fisher's just like, the door isn't even locked. And Saeris just looks at him and he's like, I just assumed it was. And she's like, you're an idiot. And I just love it. I love that moment. It's just so cute.
So obviously they are in the town kingdom. Like, I don't actually know what it's called. I assume it's a town. Territory, province. Like, it is still technically under Bellacon's purview as king, but it's also not, because he's not allowed in. And he doesn't have access to it. So it's like it's its own little territory.
Yeah. I wonder if other people know that he doesn't have access, or that's just something that they're keeping secret.
No, I don't know.
Like, Bellicon definitely knows himself, but
so it's Kalish is where they are. And, like, she really thought that it would be a war encampment just from the way everyone has spoken about it. Like, it's right on the front, so she assumed it would be like a war zone. But it's like they're in this, like, really stately manor house. Like, I don't know if it's grand enough that it's a castle, but it's a stately manor.
Similar.
And, like, it's obviously super fancy, but again, of course, it has a lived-in feeling, and, like, it's homey, even though it's fancy, because that's always how they are. And so, like, there are a ton of portraits around, and she can see that they're all, like, dark-haired males that look a lot like Fisher. So she is assuming that this is Fisher's home that his family has lived in for generations before Bellicon ordered his mom to marry him. Yeah. And she says that, like, this place feels really safe and calm, so it's nice. So I guess they're on their way to the forges, and they run into a creature in the halls that's only 3 feet tall and carrying a tray, and Fisher addresses him by name as Archer, and he is shocked that Fisher is there at all, and when he realizes that, he's like, you're real, like, you're actually here.
He asks her if she sees him too, and it's just like... so funny.
He hugs him close and cries and tells him he misses him, which is cute.
It is.
And I guess Saeris notices that he looks like he's made of embers, and he singes Fisher's shirt, and, like, Fisher laughs, and it's, like, not a cruel laugh, but, like, a genuine laugh, so it's sort of showing us that, like, oh, he's actually being he can be himself here. Like, he's more relaxed than we've seen him so far. And, like, we're seeing that he's kind to this 3-foot embery thing.
Yeah.
So I guess Archer goes about his business, and Saeris, like, asks, like, who or what is that? And turns out he is a fire sprite. And there are also water and air sprites here too, but not many earth sprites. I wonder why he felt the need to make that distinction. Like, we don't have many earth ones here. And he also says, like, you know, you should learn about all the different types of lesser fae so that you don't make a mistake when you're, like, talking to them. Or
Also, so you don't end up in stupid deals.
Yeah, that too. So she just reminds him, like, I'm not going to be here long enough to need all that, because I'm going to make your relics and then I'm going to go home. And he's just like, he doesn't really understand why she wants to get home so bad. She was like, he's like, there's oppression, there's starvation, and, like, you know, why do you want to go back there? But she's just like, you have friends you want to help here. Well, I have friends and family I want to help too. And in my head, I'm like, it's so valid. Like, so valid. And I'm like, I don't understand why he didn't think of that.
Well, also, like, I don't know. What is going to happen with all of this? Anyway, that's a future question.
It is a future question. So she's momentarily distracted by his dawn, morning, and snow scent, and, like, has to consciously remind herself to, like, stay on topic. And then he reminds her, like, it is his birthright to help and save these people. Like, he is, you know, he is the leader of this town. So she's just one person in her city. So, like, why should the burden of saving everyone be on her when, like, it doesn't have to? And her only response is, like, it's the right thing to do. Which I really appreciate, I guess. Like, you know, it's just demonstrating she's a good person.
Yeah. And, like, obviously there's shit going on with him. He's also 5 bajillion years old. So, like, it's hard to fault him for losing faith when, like, I'm losing faith in the world right now and I'm only 35.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So they go to the forge then, and it's very different to the forge in Belicon's castle. Like, it's huge, and it's well stocked, and it's clean, and it opens onto the mountains, which she thinks is wild because she's never seen them before. But she's also really confused because they were on the 3rd floor walking through his manor, which I don't really understand how she knew she was on the 3rd floor. They must have gone through a lot of, like, snaked their way through the whole house.
Yeah.
But now they're on the ground floor. So she's like, what happened?
Fair.
Like, the math isn't mathing.
Yeah.
And he just says, like, it's actually, he's magicked that specific door in the house to bring them from his manor to the forge. So the forge isn't actually in the manor house. He's just created almost like an immediate portal that you don't even notice.
Fun.
Which is fun. Like, he's got a lot of cool tricks.
Yeah, I like it.
And she's just, like, annoyed about this magic door. And she's like, if you could do that, why couldn't we have used one of these instead of that Shadowgate that made me sick? And scared. Yeah. I think that she's very upset about this whole Shadowgate incident. More so because it seemed scary than the fact that it made her sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he just says the Shadow Gate is needed for long distances, and it takes so much energy to make, like so much magic, that they couldn't do it in the Winter Palace because Bellicon would have felt it and then gotten to them before they managed to get through it. So they needed to be 50 leagues away for Bellicon not to notice the magic usage. And that tavern just happened to be at the 50 league mark. Convenient.
Very convenient.
And he also said they can only use shadow gates because then she makes an offhand comment about, well, why can't you use shadow gates to travel? Why do you need the Quicksilver to travel between realms? Why can't you use shadow gates? And I'm like, girl, if they could use shadow gates to travel between realms, don't you think they would be already? Like, come on. Yeah. Stupid question.
Yeah.
But he just says, like, obviously, shadow gates can only be used in this world. And Quicksilver isn't of this world, which is why they can travel between realms with it. Yeah. So he wants them to get to work, so he shows her a trunk full of rings. There's about 1,800 rings in there. And then he's like, I've got about 8 more trunks full of rings. So essentially, there's about 15,000 rings that he wants her to transmute each one into a pendant. So essentially, each warrior, he said, has given up this family heirloom, and he wants her to turn each one into a simple pendant similar to what he is wearing. And the precious stones that are in the rings will be incorporated, like, in a simple way into the pendant. So immediately, she sees where she's gone wrong in her deal.
Yeah.
So not only did he only have to try to get her brother and ended up getting a different human instead, she has to follow. So, like, that's all he has to do. In return, she has to follow and do everything that he says if he commands her to do it. And has to change 15,000 of these rings into relics. Which is
wild.
A lot.
Yeah.
And I guess she didn't realize he had as many people in his army as he does. And she's pissed. Because she's like, this could take months. And he's like, yep, you better get to work.
Could take years.
Could, yeah. Because, like, I guess her first issue is that she doesn't even really know how to transform rings into relics. So, like, that's her first task, is to figure out how to turn rings into relics. And then she's got to do it 15,000 times. Yeah. And, like, realistically, she could do maybe 3 to 4 a day just from the way she talks about, like, the way she discusses how her, like, experiments and stuff. We could say 4 a day because she has to do each one individually. And then my thought is, how is each warrior gonna know which one is theirs? Because, like, apparently it's very important that the relic be something that belongs to you.
Yeah.
So, like, that means she's gonna have to, if she ever does find out how to transform these rings into relics, she then has to figure out who owns each one. Because no one else is gonna know. No one else can talk to the metal or feel the way the metal feels or, like, anything like that. So how are we gonna know whose is whose?
No idea.
These are the things that I think about that keep me up at night.
Well, I wonder, like, did they tag them somehow? How, like, magically tag them? Like, I don't know.
Maybe. She can't feel that, though.
No, maybe but, like, maybe they can feel their own rings. Because, like, it has to be something, doesn't it? Like, she can't be expected to figure that out, too. Jesus.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah.
So Fisher, like, I guess he leaves her to work. And she sees that he's got tons of books written by alchemists in the forge, but most of them are written in Old Fae, and not even, like, Fisher or anyone can really read those anymore anyway. Or actually, no, he says this before he leaves. Like, he tells her, oh, here are tons of books. And she's like, I can't read these. And he's like, well, nobody else can either. And she's like, well, how's that going to help me?
This is not helpful
to
anyone.
And he's like, you'll find a way. And then he just leaves.
Like, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay.
So, Onyx shows up around lunchtime to hang out with Saeris, and she shares her food with him. So, obviously, because the books were useless, she finds some scrap metal to start experimenting, because she doesn't want to use the rings when she doesn't really know what to do with them.
Yeah, that's fair. Good point.
Yeah. So, she starts to use her ability to, like, hone it and figure out that... Because, like, she spent all of her life repressing this ability. So, like, everything she's done so far has been on instinct alone. So she wants to try and figure out how it works. So she figures out that different vibrations are for different metals and different compositions. So she managed to find the vibration for Uvelian silver, and she found some, melted it down, and was just adding random things to it for, like, no rhyme or reason.
Really, yeah, I'm like, this seems not smart.
No.
Scientifically.
Yeah, she's...
Like, what the fuck is going on?
She's like, oh, I'll add some sage that was in this pot, or I'll add some wood bark and, like, see what happens. And I'm just like, so this is literally it? You're just gonna add, like, a bunch of just random ingredients? Like, that could take years if that's your method.
Yeah, it seems like it is.
Anyway, but it's fine, I guess. Yeah. So then she makes a rough, like, medallion and lets it harden. And then she is like, okay, well, now she wants to put the medallion in the Quicksilver to see if it'll accept it or reject it. However, Fisher didn't leave her any Quicksilver. So she's annoyed. So she's like, how can I fix this? So she uses her ability and hears a really tiny whisper and feels like the tiniest of tugs towards a silver box and finds a tiny amount of, like, hardened Quicksilver there. So she makes it go liquid, and she spends the day, I guess, the rest of the afternoon, experimenting with different ingredients, adding them to the liquid Quicksilver with the medallion inside, but, like, nothing happens, obviously. Yeah. And she gets frustrated and leaves. Ren obviously meets up with her in the hallways to walk her back to her room, / to take her to dinner. And he is very bloody and messy. And she's sort of like, whoa, like, what happened to you? And he just tells her, like, very nonchalantly, oh yeah, there was an attack today, I killed, like, 30 guys. And she's like, what? She is very, like, oh my god. And he's like, it's nothing. Like,
yeah.
And then he's sort of trying to, like, apologize on Fisher's behalf, almost, like, not make excuses for him, but just sort of explain his point of view. And he tells her that, like, Fisher is really single-minded about what he has to do, like, protect his people. And since she is a tool, like, you know, with her abilities and stuff.
Yeah.
He wants to use her to achieve his goals, but he's like, I really want Fisher to treat you better, so you stay happy. So I made Fisher promise to get to know you better.
Which is wild.
It's just so funny. It's like, really? This is what needs to happen? So he was like, that's why you guys are gonna have dinner tonight. Like, it almost feels like a romantic setup. Like, this is the reason why he's organized dinner for them, but really it's wants them to get together.
Yeah.
So she goes to dinner, and he is sitting at the head of a super long table, and her place setting was at the other end, obviously.
Which, of course,
it's a tale as old as time. Yeah. So she takes that as being, oh, he wants me sitting as far away from him as possible. And he asks how today went. And she tells him it went real bad. And obviously she needs more silver for her experiments because she's got one medallion, but it's got ingredients in it. So she's like, I need more. And he's like, can't you just purify what you have and keep using that instead? And she's like, I mean, I could, but it would take me twice as long because I'll have to purify it before I can do another experiment. And he's like, yeah, it's fine. Which pisses her off because she's like, this is a contradiction. You're being contradictory here because, like, you're in so much of a rush for me to get started on this that you kidnapped me. But now you don't mind if I waste a day in between experimenting. Yeah. So it's like, oh, maybe he has ulterior motives, Saeris. Yeah. And then he has to tell her that, like, the silver that she needs, they just don't have. And that resources are really tight. Yeah. I don't love her reaction here. Like, she's like, well, you've got a ton of gold. I find that hard to believe. And he's like, you don't need gold. You need silver.
Gold this is a different world. And, like, this is the only instance that it's like, it actually is a different world. Because everything else is so similar.
They have a little situation in between this conversation where she wants some wine. And he's, like, pouring himself some. And she's like, can I have some? And he's like, yeah, you gotta come get it. And then she's like, well, fuck that. I'm gonna bring my whole plate, my place settings and everything, and I'm gonna sit right next to him because she thinks he wanted her to sit far away. So she's like, I'm gonna sit right next to him. And I'm like, this... what?
I love it, but I hate it, but I love it.
It's just so funny because, like, that's how your brain works. You're, like, gonna spite him by sitting closer. Yeah. Anyway, it's just funny. Yeah. So then she sits to his right, and it is very clearly stated that she sits in the seat to his right. Yeah. And obviously, we can tell, like, there's gonna be something.
There are signs.
Yeah, well, the fact that it says sits to his right instead of just sits down next to him, obviously this is indicative of something. Yeah. And then she has a moment of staring at his mouth and fangs, and it's all hot, and he sees that she's staring and sort of opens his mouth even more to, like, yeah. But then she's like, no, get back on track. Stop it.
I want wine.
So then she asks, like, if you don't have silver, why can't you just sell all of this gold to get silver? Because gold is worth more. But he says, well, actually here, silver is worth more than gold. And on top of that, Belicon has an embargo on silver. And if anybody finds any silver, it has to go to him. Or it's technically the crown. Not him specifically, but the crown. And he doesn't provide them with it for the war. And she's like, how does that make sense? Like, why wouldn't he give it to you for the war? He's like, he just doesn't care. And I'm like, I don't understand her incredulity. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, why wouldn't he? And it's like, you literally came from a place where your queen lives in the lap of luxury with water and doesn't give you guys any. So, like, yeah, if anything, you would understand the the hoarding of materials better than anyone, you would think.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. We don't know why they want silver,
I guess.
So it is confusing why she's confused.
They have another moment and she savors the wine. So again, like, they're bringing up how good the wine is for no reason. And
He brought out the good stuff.
And she's, like, savoring it, and he tenses his hand on his glass. We don't really know why. And then the sprites come in to serve the food. And then they make a big deal about something about Saeris. Like, they don't come out and say anything. They're like, she... And they're just gasping, and they're freaking out seeing her, but Fisher just, like, says, oh, it's all okay, you guys can go, it's fine, like, don't worry about it. So they're, like, I guess, sort of servants in the household. And, again, they're all freaking out about something about Saeris, but we don't know what. And she sort of takes offense to it. It's like, oh, they hate my manners so much, they're gonna banish me to eat in the forge tomorrow. And he's like, no, they won't. And she's like, oh, well, fine, my room maybe. And he's like, no, you'll be eating here in the dining room. And I'm just like, and then he just tells her, like, oh, don't worry about them. They're just emotional. And Archer practically raised him. Like, after his parents, Archer was the first one to hold him as a baby. So, like, geez, these sprites are really old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Good point.
And, like, I can't remember if it's this conversation. I didn't write it down. But she was like, oh, this Archer guy hates me. And he's like, no, he's really curious about you. And he wonders if you're going to be sticking around. And she's like, well, I'm not. So it's an interesting conversation there.
Yeah.
She then just asks him she was like, I know I have to stay, but can you please send Carrion home? And then she gets upset. She was like, you didn't do what you said you were going to do in our bargain. And Fisher's like, I did. He said, I said I would try and get your brother. And I did try. And he was like, I was covered in your blood. I don't remember that.
He just had blood from their handshake.
Oh.
It wasn't covered.
He said covered.
Yeah.
So he said he was covered in her blood, but also her pheromones from when she was, like, grinding all over him. So he went to her ward and was, I guess, smelling to try and track down her brother, thinking that the blood smell would, like, he would find a matching smell for her brother because they're related. And he scented her scent from 3 miles away and ran and found Carrion smelling of her, so he just grabbed him. He didn't distinguish between blood and sex at the time because he was in a hurry. So he was like, I grabbed him thinking it was your blood I smelled, but really it was the sex pheromones. So he knows that they, like, did the dirty.
Yeah. And also, it was months
ago.
So
this is the thing. She's like, that's insane. I slept with him once 3 months ago when I was drunk. So, like, I do find a little bit of an issue with this because that means Carrion, questionable consent.
Well, yeah.
And she's like, there is no way he still smells like me. But Fisher then says he would know the smell of her anywhere, on anyone, and that he could smell her blind and in the dark. And I'm like, that's the same thing.
It's not for him, though. Because he can see in the dark a little bit, because he's fae.
I guess. And then he says, or across the sea, and that he'd be able to send her ... So,
yeah,
he's showing his infatuation a little bit.
Yes,
I loved it. But do you see what I mean? How he immediately switches, and you go from, like, not really liking him as a character in the Winter Palace, and then as soon as they get here to this third location, which what I've said the entire time,
never let them take you to the second location. They might fall in love.
But like I said when I read the book, that this is where it starts to pick up. The third location. So the first location was obviously the desert, her home. Second location was the Winter Palace. Kalish is the third one. This is when it starts to get good.
Yeah.
Anyway. So he says he'd be able to send her ... and then they're interrupted by a boom. Because of course they are.
Yeah, it's like he's finally
opening up,
getting in my good books.
And the windows in the dining room blow in and shatter, and then 4 monsters jump in. And she sees them and describes them, and for us, they're your typical soulless vampires, like white skin, veins, black veins, like shooting out underneath their skin, blood red eyes, huge fangs, and like, you know, driven, like they don't have, you can tell that like there's no intelligence behind their eyes.
Yeah.
So Saeris watches in awe as Fisher like just immediately starts fighting, and it's amazing to watch. He's very talented because of course he is. Of course he is. And so I guess he's dealing with a couple of them, and then two of them come for her. And it's a guy and a girl that come for her, but the guy is quite young. Like, she thinks he's like a young teen. So she sees that they're like mindless killing machines. So she gets out her dagger and she's swiping and fighting back, and she cuts one of them and maggots spill out, which is just like so gross. Like, I hate it. I hate it. One of them tackles her and she panics because she can tell they're just gonna eat her. But just as like one of them, the woman, is like opening her mouth to bite her, her head comes off. Fisher just decapitated her. Good. And then they look over and the teenage boy is over like licking blood off the floor. Like, he is just like mindless and rabid. Yeah. And he chops his head off. He then asks her if she's okay. He was like, they didn't bite you, did they? She's like, no, I don't think so. But then he sees that she's actually been clawed. I guess in the fight, one of them clawed her. And he says that the wound needs to be scourged, or the poison would infect her. And so he's like carrying her, running through the halls. And she's starting to feel a bit woozy, and she asks, like, what are those monsters? And he's like, that's the Sanasarathian foot soldiers. The feeders is what they call them. And that only silver can kill them, which is why they need it so badly. Fair. And then he's just yelling down the hall, like, can somebody fucking help? So, like, we're really seeing that, like, he does care about her well-being. Now, whether that's solely because he needs her for relics or for something else, we don't know.
We don't.
So then she's dreaming of feeders chasing her and her falling forever. It's a weird dream. And then she wakes up and everything is hurting, and she realizes she's not in her room. But like, she did have a room, right?
She just had the room that she woke up with Carrion. Ren put her in there, I guess.
So obviously she's in Fisher's. She's in this big old 4-poster, which is hot. And he's sitting next to her in like a high back chair. And she sees the way he's looking at her and immediately gets defensive because she thinks that he blames her for getting scratched. And like, she thinks that he has something against humans, and he just tells her humans are fragile and soft. And, like, he is the thing that puts the fear of the gods into monsters that would eat her. And, like, he's mad about how fragile she is and how delicate.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm going back to my room. And he's like, no. She's like, I'm going to go heal in my room or whatever. And he's like, you've actually been healed already, but there are still trace amounts of poison in your system, so you need to rest. And he heads for the door and he says, like, you are not getting out of this bed except to go relieve yourself. And she's like, well, where are you going to sleep? And he's like, I'm going to Inir, which is the name of the war camp, for a week to handle some things. And then he's like, I don't actually need an injury to secure an invitation into someone's bed. And when the time comes, she'll be begging him. And I'm like, yes. I'm like, yes, please. Yeah, but like, he's 1,700 years old. He's had a lot of practice. Like, think about how into it you gotta get to, like, not get bored.
Yeah.
So that pisses her off, and she tries to, like, throw a pillow at him, but misses completely, which makes him laugh, and then he leaves. So then she tries to get out of bed, be like, well, he can't tell me what to do. And she tries to get out of bed. Only looks like he can tell her what to do. That he used their bargain to command her, and she does not have an option to get out of bed. So that's fun for her. Yep. So she stays in bed for 5 whole days. So I would get so bored. Like, what do you do? They don't
like. They're bringing her books, but still.
Yeah, I would be so bored. So the sprites bring her meals, and the healer in the house, Taylana, comes every day to read her blood to make sure that, like, the poison was fading. On the 5th day, Carrion comes to visit, and they share breakfast. And, like, I'm just like, where was he for the other 4 days? Like, why didn't he come to visit her at all before that? No. And I love this scene so much because we learn something that is the most adorable. So, like, he teases her about, she was like, because she expressed how upset she was at Fisher for, like, forcing her to stay in bed. And he's like, you know how we can get back at him? Revenge fucking on his bed. And she's like, no. And he's like, just for the revenge fucking on his bed or just fucking in general? Like, and she's just like, no. It's a hard no. And then she sees that, like, he's got really muddy boots. She's like, where have you been? Why are you muddy?
Yeah. You didn't even have a boot
yeah,
last time
yeah. And he's like, oh, I've been out training with the guards. And she's like, wait, where did you get the boots? Because, like you said, the last time he was missing a shoe. And he said, oh, that night that you had dinner with Fisher, but it was before dinner, Fisher came and offered him the boots on one condition. That he take a bath. Because Fisher was all wound up about the way he smelled.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it so much.
I feel like he only realized what he smelled like in that room when he was like earlier in my part, when after Carrion woke up and said, I thought you weren't infatuated with me anymore. I think that's when he realized it, though. But it is the same day, literally, that he went back and was like, you need to fucking shower.
Yeah.
Shower.
Yeah.
But not
well,
shower.
It's funny because he was like, oh yeah, the sprites came in, scrubbed me with all these brushes, covered him with a white clay, let it harden, and then crack off. And then even use a special moss all over his body, but paying special attention to his nether region. Yeah. And she's like, ew. Because, like, she was like, you let the sprites essentially give you a handy. And he was like, yeah, I didn't mind it.
And he's like, they weren't fire sprites. They were
yeah,
water
so
sprites.
It's better. But, like, I just love that Fisher was like, you can't smell like her. And I loved it.
Yeah.
And then he tells her to hurry up because the sprites said that essentially once she finished her entire plate of food, she could get up. And she's like, why didn't you say that before? Yeah. So then she, like, polishes off her plate and is finally able to get up. So then we get a little time lapse of about 8 days. So it's been 14 days since her around 13 days. I can math. Since her and Fisher had dinner. And she spends each day in the forge experimenting with adding different things to the metal to see what can withstand the Quicksilver. But, like, obviously she's not finding anything. And she's, like, adding, like, silly things like thyme or rosemary and salt. And I'm like, are you baking bread? What are you doing?
Yeah, there's no rhyme or reason. I'm just so confused.
And, like, I hope she's taking notes on what she adds so that she knows. And, like, it just feels so impossible doing it the way she's doing it because, like, what if you need 2 pinches of salt versus 1 pinch of rosemary? You know what I mean? Like,
100%. But, like, I guess, like, what else do you do? I'd be paralyzed by choice. I would just do nothing.
Yeah,
like,
I guess.
So I don't. It's not good. It's impossible.
Yeah. So she finds absolutely nothing that works. And she's gotten into this rhythm. She does 3 experiments a day and then spends the rest of the day refining the silver back to pure so she can experiment again the next day. And as she experiments and refines the silver, though, like, a little tiny bit is lost each time. So, like, she's starting to lose hope that she's ever going to figure it out. Yeah. Because, as Fisher said, there is no more silver for her to use. So, eventually, she's not going to have any left. And so, like, she's losing hope of ever seeing Elroy or her brother again. And, like, if she goes back to the third board, she's not going to see her brother anyway. So, like, anyway. So, as she's working, Ren hops the wall and surprises her. He's covered in blood again. And tells her, like, Fisher is back and he wants to see you at dinner. And she's just like, no. Because she's really mad at him for using the bargain to order her in bed. Like, she's pissed. So she's like, no, I won't. But then she ends up, like, goading him into, like, I'll only go if you go. And he's like, ooh, Fisher won't want me there. And she's like, I don't care. I refuse. And he was like, oh, fine. So before he goes to get ready, she asks about Nimmerel, which is Fisher's sword. And we get a little bit now about god swords. And he says that all the god swords went silent and abandoned the Fae years ago, except for Nimmerel. Apparently, though, it has tarnished and blackened over the years, where it used to be this, like, brilliant silver, but the spirit of Nimmerel has never left Fisher's side. So essentially, it's, like, insinuating that he is good and he is worthy of this god spirit to stay with him. So sort of, like, showing that, like, no one has the god spirit hasn't abandoned him. Yeah. So later she does go to dinner and she's wearing, like, a plain shirt and pants. Like, Carrion thinks that he's like, you didn't change from your time in the forge, and she was like, yes, I did. And he was like, you should have worn the lacy black dress that's in your room.
I love this part.
And, like, starts talking, and she was like, what use do I have for a dress? And he's like, oh, but it would make your tits look great. And your ass, yeah.
And it's very sheer. And I'm like, ooh.
And they're just, like, talking. He was just talking about how much he wants to see her body in that dress. And they enter the dining room, and then there's a growl. Ah! I love it, too.
Love it.
From Fisher. And obviously, he doesn't like the conversation. And he is obviously pissed that she invited both Ren and Carrion to dinner. But she is pissed at him, too, for, you know, forcing her in bed. Obviously, there is a place setting for her at the opposite end of the table. The table is a little bit shorter now than it was the first time, but she's still at the end.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, here they are, relegating her to the other end of the table like a second-class citizen, and she doesn't like it.
Yeah.
So she's like, nope, not doing that. So she, like, essentially, I can't remember if she grabs her stuff again, but she just goes and sits on Fisher's right again. And Ren is sitting on Fisher's left. So she sits across from him. And he, like, spits out his wine. He's like, ah!
It's great.
It is a spit take. And she's like, He's like, here, I can move, and you can sit next to Fisher on my side. Like, it's okay. And she's just so confused.
How are you confused about this now? Like,
yeah.
It's so obvious.
And Fisher just says, like, it's okay. Just let her sit there. Like, she's made her choice. So, like, there's definitely something going on, but we don't know what it is. And Fisher refuses to, like, tell her.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is fair.
No, I don't think so either, but I do find it funny.
So, they start eating, and Fisher offers to let Carrion train with the garrison, who will be at the manor for a week. Like he said, we're staying for a week, and then we're going back. And Saeris wants to train too, but Fisher tells her that she should keep working in the forge. Like, you know, you have enough work to do. And she's like, I could literally do 1,000 experiments and not find the transmutation process that I need. And, like, the way you're having me work is not feasible. And he's like,
Yeah.
she just says, like, it seems like you don't care about my progress and you just want to keep me here. And he's like, I do want you to stay. But then he's like, because you're an alchemist. And I need one of those. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Which I just love. But then Ren speaks up and he's like, oh, you're welcome to train in the morning. Like, we're gonna practice disarming. So, like, I think you should join in on that. So then Ren and Carrion start talking battle stuff, you know, guy talk. And Fisher and Saeris start talking to each other, and it's like a hot conversation. And she tells him that he shouldn't have compelled her because it's wrong, and he's taking advantage of her. But he counters that if he was taking advantage, he would have forced her onto her knees already. Woo!
It gets hot.
And also, he would have, like, forced her to part her legs for him.
Yep.
And she's like, I wouldn't want you to do that. And he's like, yeah, but then if I did do that, then you would get to be the innocent person. It wouldn't be your fault, and you wouldn't have to face the fact that you want me. And then he's like, it would also prove that I'm the evil monster that you think I am. And I'm just like, eee.
But true, though.
Yeah. But she's like, I don't want you. And he's like, yeah. Sure. He's like, are you sure you're not thinking about, like, me sliding my hands up your thighs, slipping my fingers inside, and, like, rubbing your clit and begging me to sink my cock inside of you? And of course, they're not being that quiet. So Ren hears all of this and chokes on his wine.
Yeah. And can smell.
Yes. And, like, she is super embarrassed because she is really turned on. And Ren can probably smell that. And she's ashamed that she's really turned on. Yeah. And she just tells him to shut up. And then he's like, there's a change of plans. He was like, we're gonna leave tomorrow now, and you're coming with us. Back to the war camp.
Why this change of plans?
I don't know.
Why? I don't either.
Could it be to keep her close by?
But he said that they were gonna stay there for a week.
Keep them... Well, I don't know. Maybe she could, like, disappear into the forge for the day and, like, be away from him, but maybe in the war camp she can't. Or maybe he wants to show her, like, this is what you're fighting for, maybe?
Maybe.
So the war camp has, like, 20,000 tents. And because it has been there so long, there are some permanent structures set up. There's, like, a tavern and, like, there's a couple of things. So there's this frozen river that separates the camp from the enemy territory. And the enemy territory is black and dead. And it's called Amontraith, which is, like, translated to Hell's Teeth. And they see a fortress over there, and there's, like, sheer obsidian walls, and it's built from the bones of demons. So they show up. I think they used a shadow gate again, but again, like, doesn't make her sick that time. And this long, wiry creature appears, telling Fisher that his lodgings have been prepared and that he should meet with his men. And Fisher tries to tell him that, Renfis will meet with the men, but he says, but sir, like, apparently so few men saw you last week that the rest of them don't believe the rumors that you're back, and, like, you should meet with them so that they know that you're here. And Fisher just sort of, like, ignores it, puts up his hood, and disappears into camp. And Ren is, like, really pissed. Like, and we can tell that Ren is pissed. Yeah. But he takes Carrion and Saeris to the armory.
Fun.
So then we get a little bit about the river. So it's called the Darn, and it's the river that runs between them and Amontraith. And so Ren tells her and Carrion about the river as him and Carrion practice sparring. He says it keeps them safe, but it's also frozen right now, so riders can cross it. Like, it's safe, it's secure enough when it's frozen that people can cross it. But it's, like, very far. It's very wide. So obviously Ren knocks Carrion down a whole bunch, and Saeris laughs at him. And then Ren's like, oh, it's your turn. So they spar next, and obviously he knocks her on her ass a whole bunch. But she does learn quick. She was like, I watched him with Carrion first, and she does get a few good blocks in, and attacks him, like, because he goes where he's like, you can't always be on the defensive. So she's like, okay, fine. So she attacks him, and actually makes him take a step back, which in her brain was like, oh my god, this is really good that I did that. Yeah. Because, like, she knows that he was holding back, and that he could have knocked her on her ass, like, immediately. But he was holding back. But, like, he's still an extremely talented thousands-year-old warrior. So, like, the fact that she made him take a step back was, like, pretty good.
Yeah.
Then Fisher shows up and distracts her enough that Ren disarms her again. And she's pissed that Fisher saw that. And Ren asks, like, oh, are the captains all gathered and ready to go? And he says, mostly. And Ren says, like, you are required to go to that meeting. And if you respect me at all or care for me at all, you will go. Yeah.
I love it.
So, like, this is a hard line for Ren. So, like, I feel like we can imply from this conversation that since Fisher has been gone, Ren has sort of been leading the armies, pulling up the slack, taking care of things. But now Fisher is back, and he wants Fisher to, like, sort of show his face. At least.
Yeah.
So, Fisher tells Ren to take Carrion with him because he has to talk to the alchemist. So she doesn't even get a name there. She's just the alchemist. But he leads her to his tent, and, like, it's a straight up Harry Potter tent. It's, like, regular size on the outside. But then on the inside, it's way bigger through magic. And there's a king-size bed in there, because of course there is.
Of course.
And she sees that there's, like, bread and soup on the table. And he just wanted her for lunch, essentially. Which is cute. I liked it. Yeah. So he actually does compliment her fighting. And she's like, oh, like, you're actually giving me a compliment. He's like, yeah. She's like, you didn't know that a human could fight. And he's like, no, I could tell you could fight. Like, I could tell you had training by the way that you move. And she's like, oh, okay.
Fun.
Yeah. But then they start arguing about power and control. Because even though he's been okay with her right now, like, she's still pissed that he compelled her to do things. And he just says, like, she's too important, and her abilities are too important to risk. So he says he'll do whatever he needs to do to keep her alive. And she's just like, did you ever think that I actually want to stay alive? And, like, she's like, if you just, like, explain to me your choices, then, instead of just commanding me to do things, like, just explain to me why you're making a choice. And, like, if it is actually endangering my life, then I'll probably agree with you. So, like, you don't actually need to command me to do something. And she's also like, did you ever think that, like, I don't like the idea of Yavelia being ravaged by bloodthirsty monsters? And, like, I might actually want to help? She was like, you just have to tell me. Like, and, like, trust me. But, like, after she says, like, you just need to trust me, he doesn't let her say any more. His shadow power sweeps everything off the table. And he sweeps her up and pushes her against a bookshelf, and he kisses her. Yeah. What? And she just wraps her legs right around his waist, and, like, they keep making out, and he touches her, and she can feel his cock, like, rubbing against her, and, like, he starts kissing her neck and, like, rubbing into it, and she gets so turned on. She's grinding herself against him, and he's growling. And she just tells him she wants him, and that immediately cools him off, and he's across the room. Which is interesting. So, like, she sort of was almost begging, but instead he's like, nope, don't like that. So, yeah. So she says she feels his loss like a physical blow, but, like, immediately is like, oh, we probably shouldn't have done that. But then he does something really cute. He, like, approaches her, and then he like, holds her face and, like, kisses her really softly. And, like, just silently begs with his eyes to, like, not talk about it. Like, don't say anything. And, like, he just puts her hand against his heart so, like, she can feel it racing.
Which is completely different from earlier in my part, where he was like, my heart never is affected by anything.
And so, like, obviously, I feel like this is him sort of being like, and, like, also, she was just like, oh, he doesn't want this, but, like, I feel like this is sort of him being like, kind of like, no, I do.
Yeah.
But then he just tells her he can't trust anything. And he leaves the tent. It is really sad. And, like,
sad all around.
We need to figure out why he can't trust her.
Yeah.
So she immediately leaves after him. Like, she's like, I gotta get away from him. I gotta get away from his scent, his tent, all his stuff. And, like, she feels bad that she, I guess, kissed him. Like, that they did things. Yeah. So she just wanders through camp. That is, like, 20,000 strong.
Yeah, this is a terrible idea, but I guess luckily everyone's going in the same direction.
I guess. So, like, she finds Ren, who is like, what are you doing here? Let's go! And just brings her to the captain's meeting. 'Cause, like, it's fine if she hears all the captain-y things.
Yeah.
Carrion is also there, so she sits with him, and he's, like, eating something, and she's like, what are you eating, cake? And he's like, no, it's not cake. It's called quiche. It's made of egg. She's like, ooh, let me have some. So they just start sharing a piece of a quiche. I also love it. So he sort of gets her up to speed because, like, there's a bunch of people there. And he's like, oh, look, there's an angry female warrior who's, like, got white blonde hair. And he's like, she punched that guy already. So it's like they're watching, like,
I just love
they're, like, watching a daytime, like, what do you call them, soap operas.
Yeah, I just love how into it he is, because he's like, funny.
Then he notices that she has a scratch on her neck, and we're like, from Fisher's teeth, but, like, he doesn't know that, and he can't smell that on her. He's like, oh, you must have scratched yourself on something.
Yes, on your neck, with all those hickeys.
So then Fisher shows up, and she sees that he is watching her and Carrion pass the food back and forth between them. I do too.
Love it. So stupid. The jealousy thing.
I know,
so
but
stupid,
I love it.
But I love them.
I love it so much. I can't help it. I know it's terrible, but I can't help it. It just, like, makes your heart go like, oh.
Exactly.
So obviously all the captains, the warriors, are all, like, shocked that Fisher is there. They're like, oh my god, you're actually here. And they're all very pissed. He is dripping wet. So I'm like, obviously somebody needed to douse himself in ice water to cool off.
And so he didn't smell like her.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. But, like, if they needed to use the clay and the moss and everything to make Carrion not smell like her, obviously...
Yeah, but they didn't take off any clothes.
So, the female captain that Carrion pointed out earlier, her name is Danya. I don't like that they made her the mad one. The only female captain, and she's the brat, bitchy one.
It's just not. I don't love it.
Anyway, she's mad and wanted to know where he's been for the past 100 years. I'm like, that's a long time. And, like, she was like...
Well, and I feel like she's justified in
yes.
this madness.
Yeah. Because then she's like, the rumor was you were here last week, but you didn't tell us you were here. And she was like, we were supposed to be a family, and you abandoned us. And, like, another warrior, whose name is Lorith, comes up and tells Danya to cool it. And he was like, I let you punch me, but you cannot punch our commander. You can't lay a hand on him. And Danya's just like, all I remember is fighting at Gilithry and they had to watch the entire town of Yuvelian families burn to death, and then you were gone. And Ren just, like, begs Fisher to tell everyone what happened, but Fisher just says no. And then he tells everyone that he didn't want to leave, but he had no choice, and he can't tell them why. And he tells her, like, he's sorry, but he can't tell them what happened, and he wishes he could, but he can't. But he just says, like, I want you guys to know that I returned as soon as I could. And Saeris can sort of see on Danya's face that, like, she wants to believe him, but decides that, like, his reasons aren't enough. Like, 100 years are a long time.
Really give a
no,
reason.
but, like, just him being like, I can't tell you, but, like, just know that, you know, she's, like, she can see that she's, like, weighing the decision in her mind. But, obviously, she weighs that that's not good enough. So she calls him a traitor and pulls out her sword and is actually going to strike. And Fisher makes no move to protect himself. And, I mean, he could very easily. Yes.
Shadow Daddy.
But he doesn't. And he actually, like, slumps his shoulders as if he knows he deserves this.
Like, is she actually going to kill him here? Like, what the fuck?
And, like, Saeris can't help it. She just raises her hand on instinct and yells, stop. So, the Force throws Danya sideways, and her sword shatters into 1,000 shards, and they all embed into the stone wall by Ren's head.
I love it.
And everyone looks at her. Because, like, she was pretty, like, they just, like, ignored that she existed. Well, then they all look at her. And, like, I don't understand how her scent wouldn't be on him, or his scent wouldn't be on her. He was grinding on her.
Ren told her to sit by the fire.
Yes, I forgot.
So
it will burn. Right. I forgot that her and Ren have that whole awkward conversation.
Yeah.
I just didn't write it down.
Yeah, because it was.
It was, yes. I guess I'll talk about it now. On their way to the tent, when Ren finds her, he's like, why do you smell like... ... And she was like, don't worry, he didn't force me. And he's like, I didn't think that he would.
Which, good, but...
Yeah.
God damn.
And so then she's like, oh, I guess he's like... And then he tells her, he's like, sit close to the fire and it'll burn off his scent so you don't smell like him.
And then there's also the buffer of Carrion.
Anyway, so Danya just looks and says, we have a fucking alchemist? And Fisher just says, she's mine. Ah! But then they all hear this, like, thunderous boom, and they hear someone say, icebreakers, like, being called. And then the war room becomes, like, a flurry of activity, and everybody races out. And Lorith tells Carrion and Saeris to stay in the tent, and tells them that Sanisroth enemies are at the riverbank, and they need to break the ice so the enemy can't cross the river.
I like that Fisher didn't tell her to stay in the tent.
Yes, me too. But yeah, so that's where we're finishing for this week. I always like to say it's a little bit of a cliffhanger because the enemy is attacking. So what's gonna happen?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting time to stop. I like when chapters end like that because it's annoying, but I also like it because, like, you can't stop reading. And I like to stop on a chapter because then I know exactly where I was. But, like, when you're reading a book and it ends a chapter like that, you're like, well, gotta read the next one.
And that's how you end up staying up until, like, 3 o'clock in the morning reading a book when you need to be up at, like, 7.
Exactly.
But, yeah, I really, really like how it really gets good this week.
Yeah.
And I'm here for it.
Yeah. We're kind of getting a turn in Fisher's personality, so he's not just evil man who's mean to her.
Which I'm totally here for. Anyway. So yeah, I guess we're gonna wrap it up for this week. If you want to get in touch with us and share your thoughts on anything you heard in our episodes, or if you had any book suggestions, please reach out to us by email at coffeeandcoread@gmail.com. Or on Instagram or Facebook at Coffee and Co-Read and Coffee.co-read on TikTok.
So next week, we're going to be reading chapters 21 to 33, so make sure to follow along. And if you're enjoying our chats, don't forget to follow, rate, and review wherever you get our content. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you on the next page.